I did suggest to Chris when we put in this abstract that we might need a trigger warning because this is all about death and dying. But she said no. So I'm hoping that everybody here can deal with the concepts of what we're about to talk about today. But there was something that I wanted to start with that was triggered yesterday when I was listening to Tina because her bravery and courage was so affecting for me. It's kind of why this presentation came about. So I'm a psychologist. I have a practice in Sydney called Gifted Minds, and I've been working with the population of gifted, ranging from the ages of 3 to grandmothers, grandfathers, for the last 25 years. So I've had a large association with people of all ages, all intensities, and even from the little ones all the way through to the older ones, a regular concept has been about dying. The questions the little children ask, often about death, what happens after death. Yep. And also my own journey has impacted on this. So my own positive disintegrations occurred. There's 2 specific ones. And one was when I was 14 years old. And my father went overseas on one of his very many conference trips to America. And he was going to be overseas for a long period of time. And his plane crashed in Pango Pango and he never came home. And it was a complete obliteration. There was no body, there was nothing, and my brothers were older and they had left home, and I was left with my mother. No, my positive disintegration was long, but her complete disintegration impacted my whole life. So that was for me a huge experience as a 14-year-old. 10 years later, I had my second experience of positive disintegration when my firstborn child died 2 days after he was born due to birth complications. And, I was thinking, death happens. It happens all the time. And I had to process all of this. So this is why I think I'm so easy with talking about death and dying. And I know people aren't. So when we're talking today, you've got to realise we're coming from, well, I'm coming from the perspective of a big experience with death early in life. When I'm talking about dying, I use the word dying, and I talk about death. I don't talk about passing away peacefully, but I understand if people need to talk, and that's how they feel comfortable with death. So it's a bit confronting today in that I will be using, dying, death, those sort of words, because that's comfortable for me. And this is my presentation, so I can do what I like. Yeah. So also, the neurodivergency talk was very apt for us. We talked in Seng earlier this week about aphantasia and hyperphantasia because I'm aphantasic. Totally no images. I like to call it IFT, I-F-T, image-free thinking. I'm an IFT, okay, because I don't like the pathologizing that aphantasia tends to head towards because it's an abnormality, aphantasia. Anyway, so Dom is hyperphantasic. Yes, Joy? Yep, Dom is hyperphantasic. So he has imagery all around him all the time. So 2 of our neurodivergencies will be our phantasia experience and our giftedness. Okay, so this is basically why we're talking about this today. That was the background. So rage against the dying of the light. We're looking at an examination of the journey towards death, but it's not just in old people, it's all the way from very young to very old. Dom is going to actually read out this poem, and that is my mother on the side there, who is now 95, and boy, is she raging.
Do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rave at close of day. Rage against the dying of the light. Though wise men at the end know dark is right, because their words have no forked, no lightning, do not go gentle into that good night. Good men, the last wave by, crying how bright their frail deeds might have danced in a green bay. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Wild men who caught and sang the sun in flight and learned too late they grieved it on its way. Do not go gentle into that good night. Grave men near death who see with blinding sight, blind eyes could blaze like meteors and be gay. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. And you, my father, there on that sad height, curse, bless me now with your fierce tears, I pray. Do not go gentle into that good night. Rage, rage against the dying of the light.
So, Dylan Thomas provokes us with these words. Old age should burn and rave at close of day, and demands that we rage and rage against the dying of the light. But I am more inclined towards go gentle into that good night, turning the negative around and embracing the journey through the latter years of life towards a well-crafted death, if that's possible. So this is my experience with my 95-year-old mother. She has rheumatoid arthritis. She is in extreme pain. Her life is miserable. She rails against the fact that she cannot die. She's not allowed to have assisted dying because she's not terminal. And she is in this place that is just unbearable to watch. So I'm trying to look at this from the idea of, we need to look towards our deaths in a way that is constructive and creative, and we need to look at images of old people. We need to see the wrinkles. Our children using social media do not see these. Social media workshops out the wrinkles and the age spots and the grey hair and everything that relates to elders. But, for us, we need to look at our elders and think about what the wisdom is that they have. So this presentation is based on both lived and clinical experience. The lived experience I've been pretty explicit about, and aims to examine our pathways into dying, and we're using Dabrowski as a bit of a lens. Now, when I talk about that, I have in the room today someone who is very dear to me, and that is Linda Silverman, and she introduced me to Dabrowski, many, many, many years ago, probably in the early 2000s when she visited Australia. And I had that aha moment that we all have, and that is, oh my goodness, those overexcitabilities, they just explain everything about me, okay? So I came from that sort of initial, as a psychologist, looking at the idea that IQ is a very, very small part of what is a gifted person, and in fact maybe is becoming less and less useful. But however, I do assessments with children because if anything can help the schools change, I'm willing to go there. If there's anything that I can give to a parent that will give them the means to advocate at a school, then if it's a little tiny thing like an IQ, we go with that. But we also look at the range of overexcitabilities. And now, as Dom's coming into the practice, we're looking at the other aspects of Dabrowski. We're looking at TPD, we're looking at dynamisms, we're looking at the factors, we're looking at the multi-level development. So it's from going from the overexcitabilities in our practice to using more and more of Dabrowski as we learn more and more about him. So we're actually here as a learning experience for us as well, because we're quite babies as it comes to Dabrowski. So we've got a lot of learning to do.
Yeah. It's interesting in working with the kids in Sydney, and obviously in extension the parents, that there's some parents who are more willing to delve themselves into some of Dabrowski's theories, and they're the ones that have done more work on themselves from that perspective as well, the ones that are more attuned and have maybe gone to therapy in the past themselves and are more in touch with themselves. But there's some who are very like, what? theory of positive what? That sounds horrifying. Like, what are you talking to my son about? So it can be have more standoffish, parents who I have to try to illuminate the ideas.
Yeah. So I'm going to talk a bit about the gifted elder and going through the phases of grieving as physical and mental faculties are progressively deteriorating. And Dom is going to talk a bit about practice and case studies with children and their interest in death, and how he talks to the children and the parents about the concept of death and dying. So we'll be going back and forth. So, the classic grieving stages were by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. And I just wanted to show you this slide because it's not that nice smooth run from denial, anger, depression, bargaining to acceptance. It's a bit more Dabrowskian because it's all interlinked and over the place, and you can have a positive disintegration here and pick up and go on, and then go up and down in your levels and look at your different dynamisms. So just thinking, it's not straightforward how you grieve, and it's not straightforward how you go towards your own death. So gifted individuals encounter, process and move towards death during their lives. Neurodivergent individuals, if we encompass that as well, giftedness as neurodivergence, it's all part of that intensity. So we are going to ask questions about dying. So though the presentation is not experimental, it does include case studies, information, and they're from children, creatives and elders, and all with permission, of course. So, come on, we all know that it just doesn't appear out of anywhere using the term giftedness. You can't just see that a child is gifted when they're 10 years old when they do some sort of test. It doesn't disappear either when we end school or college or when formal education ceases. And I am so totally in agreement with the presentation before in terms of the fact that giftedness is not academic achievement. In fact, most of the children we deal with in our practice will not be performing well academically in their year group because it's not the right place for them. That is not the fit. They are not comfortable. They are suffering huge amounts of boredom. And the boredom exacerbates all the different overexcitabilities, all the different traits of autism and ADHD. Everything is exacerbated by what I call chronic daily boredom. Not just a little bit of boredom, not just a little bit of, boredom that can make you creative, but chronic daily toxic boredom. So many parents can see traits of giftedness in their newborns. You can see those alert babies when you first hold your child, heightened sensitivity, intensity, super alertness, increased reactivity, craving for stimulation, it's all there. And I also saw boredom very, very quickly because my firstborn child at 9 months of age, used to bang her head on the floor in frustration because she couldn't walk. She wanted to walk. She was 9 months old, she couldn't walk, so she would just bang her head down on the ground. And
I was a lot more peaceful.
Thank goodness. So this is for people who are coming to just this presentation. We all know this. So in his theory of positive disintegration, conflict and inner struggles are seen as necessary for development. The experience of overexcitability is important in this progression towards higher level development. Now we know this, but lots of our clientele don't. And they don't want to have to struggle, and they are worried about their struggles, and they think that life should just be all smooth sailing. Dom will talk a little bit about this later on when it comes to parents. So, the first factor where I thought my mother might well be stuck, but I think maybe not. Or maybe I need to be a bit more objective. So the combination or pattern of OEs that leads to a perceived discrepancy between the qualitative experience of life of an individual compared to the social norms and values of those in the same environment. So we're looking at how the factors, the intensity, and how that affects, well, I am in particular, the gifted elders and the elders in general. So what I want to talk about is what happens when their overexcitabilities begin to fade and falter. And I want to see it in the perspective of the overexcitabilities being positive, not negative, because there are obvious negatives in the overexcitabilities as well as positives. But for the gifted elder, what happens when their speed of motion, their strength, their speed of thinking and talking decreases, and they can't function at that level that they were so used to functioning at? And it might have been a problem at the time, but when it starts to disappear, wow, they miss it. They miss that. They miss having to use walkers, and I'm sorry, they don't miss. They miss not having to use walkers, and they rail against. Well, from my perspective and my own experience, they rail against having to use walking sticks. And my own mother will not get into a wheelchair, which means it's cut off all sorts of stimulation for her. She won't get into a wheelchair. She can't be taken out. And why won't she get into a wheelchair? Well, what will people say? Come on, we need the stimulation. So then we've got the sensory aspects of what's happening as you get older, the dulling of sensation. So for myself, I'm aphantasic, so I don't have internal images, but I now have glaucoma. So my vision, my external vision, is also changing. And, that's something, I'm getting older, something to think about, and what will happen in the future with impaired not only internal vision, but external vision. Also, they can't get out into nature as much. They may have less physical contact. They may not have people to hug them or touch them or stroke them. Their sexuality is changing. How many 80 or 90-year-olds are having a regular healthy sex life? And, there are some out there. So again, we're coming into the intellectual with the overall slowing down, and specifically memory issues, dementia, and the fear of that, the fear of having dementia. Like, I forget things now. I'm 65, but that's not dementia, that's normal. But, just having someone say, hey, Fiona, that's normal for you is quite important.
With my grandmother, who is very formidable, I guess would be the word I would characterise her as, you can see the fury in her eyes when, say, we're doing the crossword or something and something's gone, something's faded out, and she'll get so angry with herself, but then sometimes that anger will then be externalized on maybe Fiona's brother, who's looking after her very altruistically, which can cause obviously friction, but it's not her fault. But yeah, it's very tough for her to have that. She's very verbose, very mellifluous, so that is really enraging her.
Yeah, so my mother is a typical 95-year-old woman who denies that she's gifted. I mean, this is a woman who's still doing the crossword and playing Scrabble every day and getting 300, scores of 300 in Scrabble. Like, yes, gifted, Mum. No, it's just common sense. So imaginational, just loss of enjoyment in creativity. Suddenly, if you're an artist or a writer, just finding that that part of your life might be over or changing. And emotional, dealing with friends dying. Mum's talking about her funeral and she's saying that I don't want a funeral, there's no one left. She's 95, it's not surprising. Her best friend is 100, and that person physically is incapable of going out to the funeral. And just mood swings, and the mood swings that comes with medications that some of these people have to take as well too. So Mum has to take codeine for her pain, and if she isn't getting the codeine, then her mood is appalling. It's, very malicious and nasty. Then she realises that, and then she's feeling, contrite. Yeah. So all of these things come into crafting your way towards what would be a good sense of dying. So, we've got these highly active and energetic, restless, fidgety, mentally active, expressive, animated elders. And you can do so much still when you're getting older. There's a nonagenarian that's doing Olympic records in the pool at the moment. But a lot of people, as they get older, they don't know that they can as well too. So just someone to help them see that these things are still really important.
Look at Mick Jagger. He's still performing at 80 years old and hip thrusting and running around. He's an inspiration.
So, going from this, running and gesturing, to this is hard. It's difficult. Then you've got the sensory intensity or overexcitability, that love of art and music with visceral reactions, the goosebumps, strong reactions to the sensory experiences, the love of physical contact, this great enjoyment of beauty and nature and art. But the thing Mum misses most is going to the art gallery and, seeing the art. But, you can do these things. You can get these experiences, but you've got to be able to have someone help you or have a group or understand that it's still possible. And, there's Einstein on his bike. I just love that picture, zipping around as an older man. So this love of pondering, the intolerance of injustices doesn't go away when you're 90. The questioning of everything. Your memory starts going. The love of solving problems, the joy in digging deep. It's all, the passion for these things is still there, okay? But this is what starts happening. The slowdown, the memory loss, the questioning of yourself. So the love of daydreaming in the imaginational overexcitability, the vivid imagination, the love of design, the creative, inventive, divergent thinking, the love of fantasy. Even this is changed in experiences like medication can dull all of these things. Like Mum's not dreaming at night anymore because of the meds she's taken, or she's having massive hallucinations, which are terrifying because the codeine is causing these changes in her brain. Either way, she can't quite get the imaginative experiences that she used to have. And this extreme empathy and compassion, that doesn't go away. Preferences for one-on-one with a best friend or a soulmate. Strong feelings of rage, joy and excitement, and feeling different. It's all still happening. And this is then exacerbated by coping with the grief and anger and fear and the accompanying loss. So this is just working through the loss and the faltering of your overexcitabilities. And I just want to play a bit of this. This is my stepfather, my mother's husband, who died a few years ago. And talking about aging and memories, this is his experience of remembering his past. And you can see how clearly he remembers things from the time he was 10 and 13. And it's just a wonderful, bear with me, it's just wonderful to
80 years ago.
School. Went to Lloyd Street State School in Malvern and Iris in Melbourne.
Mm-hmm.
And we used to sometimes wish for wet days, because that would mean that my aunt would come over in the bus for the hot meat pie, not the sandwich that my mother used to give me. And it was a set where Betty had a fight in the schoolyard over some item. And I heard this thing, fight, fight. So all the children used to rush to a fight. And there's Betty hurrying into to this other girl about the same age then, 11 I think, or something about that. And all over Betty's, what sort of sandwiches? Pineapple sandwiches. Because somebody had stolen her pineapple sandwiches. So my mother had a visitation for the mother of the girl. And hard times were had by all at that time.
I'm sure, yes.
But Auntie would come across with a big bag and she'd have 2 or 3 pies in a meat pie. She made herself, of course. Brought them all the way across, which would be about, from here to Mossman, surely. And we'd get these 2 meat pies, Betty and I, and it wasn't long before children started to gather around. Not in large numbers, but just 2 or 3. Bearing in mind, this was a depression.
Yeah.
Give us a bit. Can we have a bit of that, please? So on. And that's one little memory.
Did you share or not?
I can't recall Betty would tell me what to do. Don't do that yet.
Not sure that Betty would have shared her pie.
I don't think Betty would have.
But yes. And the other thing, I suppose, I remember is I used to stutter.
Yeah.
And it's not that badly, perhaps, except when my brother used to attack me. Anyhow, in this particular occasion, I went to Melbourne High School. Now I'd be about 13, I suppose, first grade. And to my horror, everybody in the class had to stand up, give their name, what their father did, and where he lived.
Typical Melbourne.
And of course, my name began with Peterson, nothing else. There was no Clives or anything, it was Peterson. So I'm waiting in this, and everybody goes me for, Osborne, something, but the other, who's next? Peterson, you see. Now, I stood up. Now, what's your name? The worst letter you could give me? Absolutely. Peterson. And everybody starts laughing.
So yeah, this was the memories that stuck with him was the bullying he got from stuttering. So Peterson, he couldn't say his name, and the playground fights over his sandwiches, which I just thought was amazing. So this man, my stepfather, was a very gifted man. He was one of the first chemical engineers in Australia, and he was fluent in Swedish, German and English, and he spent time in Sweden, working in Sweden when he was early in his career. But for all his wonderful intellect and his attributes, and he was generous and loving, he also held some pretty out there, racism, homophobia, various things that we tend to say, he was an old white man, a stale, pale male.
I know that.
But I don't want to in any way denigrate his memory, but the people come with their memories, and this is just part of who they are. So also what we're looking at, as with the elders, is the striving towards one's personality ideal, and who do you idolise and who do you want to be like. Gandhi and Mother Teresa in the past may be ideals for today. Attenborough, Goodall.
Judi Dench, Morgan Freeman.
And Dom works with the kids as well, as thinking about who, and being more diverse than, we've just put up a lot of white people here, but obviously we work with children of all different colours and all different races. So Australia being multicultural and also all different gender identities, and we are very aware of ideals in all these different areas and looking at who might you want to be.
One of the 9-year-olds I work with in Sydney, their absolute hero is RuPaul, and how he is aging gracefully yet still, as they say, slaying. So I thought that was a fantastic example. Oh, this is my bit. Okay. So in our work, we encounter children who have many, many questions about death. The more highly gifted they are, the more they want to know all about the process of dying and what happens after. Their questions can be confronting and can make us worry about their mental health. This is the attitude that a lot of parents come to me about. My 5-year-old is asking questions about heaven, hell, death, body decomposition, everything. And it's interesting to see in the sessions when they bring these existential issues up, how comforted they feel by my non-huge shock reaction, my genuine interest. And they're like, oh my God, epic, we can talk about this finally. And they go into so much detail, and they're so naturally inquisitive about the entire process. And it reminds me, actually, the poem I read earlier, Rage, Rage Against the Dying of the Light. And I have this fantastic client in Sydney, it's called Jack. And we were discussing the speech I was doing here and the poem that I was going to read out. And I said, what do you think about this? This is a very existential, highly gifted writer. He's 19. Yeah, 19. And he said, I do that every night. I rage against the dying of the light every night that I go to bed. It's like a mini death. His faculties are so intense, so all-encompassing, that trying to turn himself off every night is like that poem. And I was like, Jesus. I feel, my empathy completely. And we talked that through, and that was fantastic. But here are some pictures of real older people, which is very important, which, as Fiona pointed out, they're not really on, Instagram, Facebook, and not even really on my Instagram, I admit. I've got a lot of philosophy on there, sport, mostly, things like that, and very few old people that I find inspiring. So I'm going to change that this evening. And thinking about dying, one of Fiona and I's, Mum and I's, favourite things to do in Sydney is go to the cemetery, which is a really fantastic one. It's in Clovelly, and it's like on the cliffs, and the waves are pounding the coast, and there's a little kind of bushland forest next to it. And it's really beautiful, but you really don't see many families in there. They tend to avoid it, obviously, because of the kind of conceived morbidity. They don't want children to be around that, or to be associated with it, or to think about it. And, a parent's always going to know best for their kid to a certain extent. But if it's a highly gifted kid who wants and is eager to know about these processes, about these ideas of death, avoiding them completely is not going to, heal that, satiate that need for, the knowledge. So that's where I come in a lot, because I'd say maybe 70% of the gifted kids, teens and adults that I work with in Sydney and around the world lately, through COVID, etc. A lot of the talk is about the idea of mortality and the existential crises that inevitably brings. And I think I'm very blessed in that way as well, because I've got a very close group of friends in Sydney who enjoy talking about these kind of existential questions, and we'll stay up till 2 a.m. sometimes, probably with a couple of beers, talking about death and, cancer and why these things exist, and existential God, spiritual questions, which I think is so vital for intelligent people, and so many intelligent people lack or can't find. And that's not their fault, obviously. It's, it is institutional. So, normalizing dying. The gifted child may need to talk about death and needs to feel that we as parents, educators or therapists will not overreact if they show interest in cemeteries, artwork or literature that celebrates or questions death. And that's a fantastic Gustav Klimt artwork in that other one that you have gone too far. Sorry. Back you go. Good work. You're a great roadie. So, dynamisms in TPD. Dynamism, and obviously, there's a lot of people in this room who know a lot more about dynamisms than I. Dynamisms are mechanisms by which individuals are propelled or propel themselves from one level of personality development to another. They are often formulated as feelings, e.g. astonishment, dissatisfaction with self, or empathy, but not always, e.g. creativity and self-awareness. So this client of mine in Sydney, Jack, he is probably one of the most gifted writers I've ever had the pleasure of reading at that age. But he's so caught up in social perceptions of being 19 and what his friends think of him, and also huge existential crises. And unfortunately for Jack, which kind of feeds into what you were talking about yesterday, Tina, he's had been committed twice to psychiatric facilities, and he was telling me about the abysmal, dehumanizing treatment that he faced when he was 16 and 17 going through these facilities. And it was very affecting. Obviously, he felt like a number. He felt completely unseen. And he also told me that group therapy was one of the most boring and pointless experiences of his life, I guess. It wasn't facilitated very well. Feelings about dying. Helping express feelings about death is integral to a therapist working with clients experiencing positive disintegration. And the personality of an individual is transitioning from being based on values given by biological factors and by social factors towards self-determined values geared toward the greater good. That's a lovely Georgia O'Keeffe quote there. Shoot all the flowers. I think it's so foolish for people to want to be happy. Happy is so momentary. You're happy for an instant and then you start thinking again. Interest is the most important thing in life. Happiness is temporary, but interest is continuous. I think that is fantastic and very divisive in modern society, basically, especially with the kind of greed and consumerism and the tend to want immediate gratification, basically. And that's why so many of the kids I work with as well are completely addicted to Instagram, social media, various games, because they get that instant serotonin and everything kind of hit.
I was just going to duck in here because Dom forgot what I told him, which was talk here about the parents who come in and say, I just want my child to be happy. That is their whole thing. I just want my child to be happy. How can I do that? Part of our process is to say, no, that's not realistic.
Yeah.
You can't, we understand it, and yes, of course, but that's not what their life will be like. No. That's misrepresentation, and we need to have the skills on how to deal with the unhappy periods that we will have. That's just part of this.
Yeah, which is obviously an awkward conversation with any parent. I just want my child to be happy. No, they're going to, it's a guarantee that they will have miserable times in their lives. So multi-level. A person who has reached a multi-level view of the world is one that sees what is and what should be in terms of their values and keenly feels the difference between the two. So, working solely with gifted individuals, this is 8 times a day, can be. This really, at such a young age as well, succinct view of, the world could function like this. Why doesn't it function like this? Why does this happen? Why are we... I remember when in my first year, maybe 7 years ago now, of practicing with gifted kids, a 5-year-old girl, absolutely angelic child, came in and was asking me why she was picked on at school. And she told me it's because all she wanted to talk about was the plight of the snow leopard in Tibet and how they were skinned for their pelts. And all the other kids basically told her to bugger off, and they didn't want to hear about the goddamn snow leopards. And my heart just went out for this 5-year-old girl. My goodness, what a... she's going to do great things. She was so flabbergasted why the other kids didn't give 2 craps about the Tibetan snow leopard. Wow. Oh, yeah. Research. The results suggest that some gifted students who are experiencing overexcitabilities, insomnia, fear of the unknown, and/or death anxiety may benefit from curriculum aimed at social and emotional development, bibliotherapy, fantasy gaming, relaxation techniques, and counselling.
So crafting a good death, which is what we're, meant to be talking about to a certain degree. It's never too soon to talk about dying and to talk about the path towards death. That would be your preferred choice. And I'm writing this down. My mother and my stepfather, who you saw, had what they called a doomsday book, where they'd written down what music they wanted at their funeral, what they wanted to happen, and various items like that. And so, being naive, I came home one day after being at my mother's. Now, my mother talks about death every day. Every day. When I ring her, she says, I just want to die. And we talk about it, why she's not, etc., etc. So I came home one day and I said to my husband, maybe we should think about, I don't even know what you want when you die. Can you tell me? And he ran out of the room. He did not want to talk about it at all. So I know my experience may be somewhat abnormal from other people. So, I do realise that this is maybe in people's faces, but I think thinking about what you want when you die is really important, even when between in your 40s and 50s, because I guess the plane crash taught me that, life is very fragile and you never know what is going to happen. So avoiding talking about death and dying is common and is easy to brush it off and refuse to think about it or to answer questions. But we do encounter death. Children encounter death, whether of a pet, a grandparent, a close family member, even the death of the planet. They're looking at that, and that is terrifying. So this bit is going to be on ways that we try and help, and that... This is you? Okay.
The main way to help when people ask you about dying, whether they are old or young, is to be open about talking about it. Don't use euphemisms. A lot of kids have come in, about dead animals and the age-old kind of, they've gone to live on a farm. And, a lot of the gifted kids I work with see through that immediately. So not much use. Answer any questions honestly. Show you can be trusted. Let them know they have your full attention and support. Don't get defensive, embarrassed, angry, or upset. And I've heard some gnarly stuff in the therapy room over the years, and from kids as very young. So I had to learn through experience, how to be really congruent and non-reactive, which I am now after 7 years, thankfully. So the role of therapists: help those asking about death and dying, whether they are very old or very young, by discussing their joy, despair, and intensity. Talk about connection and ritual, exercise, nature, music, and the death doulas.
Okay, so look now, when we were in Berkeley just the other day talking at Seng, we were walking around and we were talking to a dear friend again, and she mentioned that, there's a lot more groups coming out now and different things to help people process death. Now, this one is death doulas, and people who don't have family who want to be with them towards death or can't be with them. These death doulas can be hired, and it's like a birth doula. It's someone who walks you through the process of dying, and this is part of palliative care, really. But this one, which was up in Berkeley, it's a tea talk where you can meet with people to talk about, death, dying, what you think, what you feel, just for people who don't have anywhere else to talk about it. And that was just up in a window at a cafe in Berkeley.
I mean, it's just interesting. It's the one thing we will all do, and that no one really talks about, ever.
Yeah. We're all going to do it. So as gifted individuals, our lives are filled with the joy and despair of our intensity, okay? We want to share the despair, but we also want to share the joy. So these are some of the ways. We've been talking to some of the older people that I'm working with. You can make your own rituals. That's from my yoga practice. I have a yoga practice. It starts the day. I create a little collage. I put on relaxing music. I finish my yoga practice with this big stretch. I stretch out and I go, embrace my intensity. Okay, it's very relaxing, and it's really important for me to do that every day because I work with a lot of intense people. So keep moving. Even the older people, science shows that both music and exercise can profoundly affect mood and motivation. So, with my mother, I've been trying to get her interested in music again. It also helps with pain. What would you like to listen to? Getting through the defences. What did you listen to as a youth? What is it that really helps your mood in music? There's some lovely these pictures are interspersed with older people doing things still when they're very, very old. I love the skateboarder, that's my favourite.
I like the women with the boogie boards, it's great, killing it.
So also getting out into nature, though this is more difficult, but getting out into nature without your devices as well is really important. Even if you can wheel, if they will get into a wheelchair, even if you can wheel your grandmother into the trees where they can actually just sit in the sunlight with the trees around them. It's very, very important for their feelings. So that's me in a few trees. I have a very strong passion for trees. And other elderly people.
You managed to squeeze a dachshund in there as well. Good work.
Yeah. And, we're talking about pets yesterday. Yes, pets can be very, very useful. And the grieving of pets is another part of looking at death and the dying process. Some lovely elderly yoga people. Yep. So we're nearly done, but the growing body of studies report associations between music engagement and increased well-being or emotional competence, lending support for the possibility that music engagement may also be associated with better specific mental health outcomes. Oops. Here we go. Just take a deep breath. Chopin?
I think so, yeah. One of the nocturnes. Exactly, yeah. Night.
Now I'm stuck.
Okay.
Okay. So there's Mick up the corner there. we're quite doing his thing, and other older people playing musical instruments still. So, you know, even if the body is not, if the flesh is not willing, is the capacity to keep up with the music. And in fact, it's very good for arthritis and things that come up with older age. So anyway, go gentle. Embrace the journey through the latter years of life towards a well-crafted death by facing your fear, finding your family, whatever that may be, understanding your limitations, writing your story. And Dom's going to finish off with this.
Out, out, brief candle. Macbeth. Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace from day to day, to the last syllable of recorded time, and all our yesterdays have lighted fools. The way to dusty death, out, out, brief candle. Life's but a walking shadow, a poor player, that struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and then is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. So go gentle into this good night.
That's just our email. If you've got any questions that you would like us to answer by email, please feel free. If there's any questions that anybody wants to ask now, but please do not grill us on Dabrowski.
I have the microphone. I can't even tell you how timely this is for me. And with my overexcitabilities, I was almost jumping out of my seat to mainly kind of share something. But the day before our conference started, I got back from visiting my parents, who are 94 and 96, in their home in San Diego, where they've lived for since 1960. And I'm the only child, and I'm trying to support them. And I want to recommend a book that might be helpful. It's called Finish Strong. It's by Barbara Coombs Lee, and it's excellent. And not to go too far into this, but my parents do not have any kind of illness that is going to get them, like your mother. And Barbara has a very wonderful chapter in the book, and there's more information about this on voluntary stopping eating and drinking. And that is one thing that is legal and can give people control over their death. And the book is excellent about helping people determine what they want and getting it at the end of life. I don't know what it's like in Australia, but here in the US, at the end of life, it's very likely that the medical system will sort of take over. And you have to do a lot of work to ensure that you're going to get what you want at the end of life. And so I had the conversation with my parents on Tuesday about voluntary stopping eating and drinking. And I wasn't sure we could ever do that. And my parents, I have tried to understand them all my life. I can't tell if they're gifted, if they're ADHD, if they're autistic, but they're all those things. But it was never, of course, assessed in any way. And it's been coming down the line. So I just really want to recommend the book, Finish Strong. There's a website called Compassion and Caring, which is where I learned about the book. And it's all excellent resources. And then I was very moved by music. I have recently learned that apparently I've been kind of living in this space for some time now, thinking about it a lot for my parents, for myself, people in my age group. And apparently hearing is one of the last senses to go. And I was reminded, my dad, being as bright as he is, can like get around on a computer pretty well. And I finally, like a year ago, realized he would like Spotify. And then I started making him playlists. I knew the kind of music that he liked, and I could make playlists for him. And he could play them, because we're distant. He's in San Diego, I'm in Colorado. And it got so wonderful with Spotify, because I could make things for him that he liked. He was beginning to learn how to find other music that he liked on it. And we bonded, we had things to talk about with it. And so that's just another recommendation.
Thank you, because all those resources are very useful. Yeah.
Thank you. We'll have just a couple more minutes. I think there were a couple more questions here. We're going to try to get them in the room and go to our break.
No, you're okay. Thank you both so much. That was so beautiful. I really particularly appreciated the piece around, from an existential perspective, being honest about what it is to be human and to live a life that will not always be happy. I teach a workshop with a friend every year in May for doulas, postpartum, a lot of people that work in the birth space, and we talk about this, that we have to go right into being open about the nature of human experience. In your work with gifted kiddos, gifted adolescents, when we reach that point where, maybe death itself, we're open, we're speaking about it, and then those questions around the formless beyond begin. Obviously, kiddos come from all sorts of different backgrounds in terms of religion and spirituality. I'm curious about how you work with them in structuring structures of meaning around the unseen and the beyond, and what your thoughts and feelings are about that.
I'll just say something before he starts. It's just that, yes, and we deliberately made this non-religious so that, basically, because we're open to anything that the child brings in as well. So if they are coming from a strongly religious background and that's where they want to talk about, we will accept that and ask, but they also may be coming from a strongly religious background and asking questions outside that, because a lot of parents will say, oh, well, we're Catholic. My son went to the priest and said, I don't believe in God, and it was mortifying. And so then, we got to look at things beyond that as well. So Dom does more direct work with the children now.
Great question. Obviously, it depends significantly on the situation and the child, but there's been kids in the past who, in obviously concourse with the parents who are Catholic or Christian or something, but fantastically more open. I had one kid one time who was fascinated, almost obsessed with the idea of reincarnation and Hinduism as a whole. And the Catholic parents let this very gifted, twice exceptional youngster have his head and discover everything he wanted to about Hinduism. So the sessions almost took this kind of, format of discussing, to a certain extent, obviously other things as well, highly perfectionistic child, so we focused on that as well, about, what his ideals are for afterlife, and then what he thinks the realities are, which is, again, the kind of idea of, what the world is and what the world should be, and even that after death, you know what I mean? Which obviously no one knows. One day we will. So thank you.
Thank you. We're over time, but I think there's one more question over wherever Jenna has.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. I'm wondering about, I know a lot of gifted kids who are really interested in death, and that actually seems easier to me because my natural way of being with children is just to talk about things very openly. But I'm curious if you have thoughts about those other kids who, turn away from death, who are so sensitive and feel things so deeply that the way that the existentialism impacts them is that it's just too much and too overwhelming, and that death in particular is something that is immediately flooding of their systems. And how might you approach someone like that?
I'll say something first then, Dom, quickly. Just often the child that is very cautious about talking about death, and I hope this doesn't offend anybody, but often it's the child whose parent is also very cautious about talking about death as well too. So I'm not saying it's always the case, but the fear of death is very strong, and if the parents never talk about death, and it's obvious they don't want to talk about death, we're either going to get a child who really wants to talk about death because there's no other place, or will not even think about it because it's obvious that it scares mum and dad.
Great question again. I mean, I think it's the way as well you kind of conceptualize death, and there's fantastic children's books especially which deal with death in a very gentle kind of way, which in the past has been really helpful for parents who want to, introduce the idea more, not aggressively obviously, but with their kids who have exhibited like almost an aversion to the idea and don't want to talk about it at all. So those resources are fantastic as well. But I mean, I remember last year with a child who was hugely sensitive to the idea of anything dying. And I think this was brought about from, they watched a documentary in class, which was about, global warming. And this kind of existential overview made the kid basically completely freaked out about anything. So we ended up talking for most of the initial session about plants and how that life cycle of regeneration through the soil, back up, death, sun, all that. And they left feeling a lot more, calmer about the idea of, passingness. There's a better word for that in there, but passingness. Let's end there. What's the word? Immutability.
I think we're about to end. I just wanted to say one last thing, and that is that I actually dedicate this presentation to my father, my son, my stepfather, and my mother, who is still in the process going towards dying. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.